Right. Okay, good evening, everybody. I think we've got a few more latecomers coming in, but we'll get cracking because Professor Tomkins doesn't like being too late. So first of all, a big thank you to all of you for coming out on a typically dreich Glasgow evening for our event this evening. So we've decided, by the way, my name's, I should explain, my name's Eddie Barnes. I'm the director of the John Smith Centre, based here at the University of Glasgow. I'll talk a little bit about that as well before we get into the subject of this evening's event. So we've kind of come up with this event for two reasons. One, because in Adam Tomkins, we have a professor here on campus who's just written a book rather on free speech, and it would seem like a shame not to get him to talk about it. So we'll hear a lot more about Adam as this evening progresses about his theories and his thinking behind that book. So thank you so much, Adam, for joining us this evening.
Pleasure.
And secondly, I think the second reason is because Adam's book on free speech does turn out to be extremely well timed. If you are only even slightly engaged with politics and public life just now, the questions around what we all in society should and shouldn't be permitted to say are ones you wouldn't have been able to miss. And perhaps these questions are being made and pored over like never before. I think let's just run through just a few of some of the controversial questions that many of us will have seen or read about in the last few weeks alone. Question 1, should you be arrested for sending an offensive or threatening tweet aimed at minority or vulnerable groups such as trans people, as writer Graham Lynham was earlier this year? Or question 2, if you send a tweet describing opponents of Israel as Jew haters, should you receive a visit by police to your door, as one columnist did recently, warning you that any further such comments would trigger your arrest? Or question 3, on the other side of the fence, if you want to express your opposition to the Israeli government by supporting the group Palestine Action, should you be arrested for doing so, as many people have been? Now, these questions and many others have been asked of everyone from the Prime Minister down over the last few weeks and months, and the perceived heavy-handedness of the state in response has seen those particularly on the right of politics, like Nigel Farage, compare the UK to North Korea. And that is the debate, the level of debate we've got ourselves into. In other words, I think, to summarise, the questions around free speech have become very much part of our modern-day culture war. Align yourself with somebody who is pro-free speech, and immediately you're associating yourself on the side of J.D. Vance and Donald Trump and the late Charlie Kirk. Question the right of people to say anything they like, and lo and behold, you're part of the woke mind virus, as it's known. Choose your side. Either way, you risk being cancelled one way or the other. Now, I think that simplistic division is very damaging. And what we want to do this evening is put aside the culture war and talk about how we talk and listen to each other better, and how a society should seek to govern a better way of talking and listening to each other. Let me just very briefly set out why I think we at the John Smith Centre want to do that. At the Centre, we work to encourage young people, like many of the young people in this room here, to step forward into public life and politics. We don't take political sides. We just want to provide opportunities for young people from all walks of life and from all sides of the political debate to take up public life if they wish. That's why we run internships. That's why we do research. It's why we hold events like this here on campus. And my worry at the moment about where we are just now is that when you have this political culture war ongoing, as we do over free speech, the result is that as ever more people pile on, many other people choose to self-censor and to butt out. We stop thinking, we stop talking. And I can think of many times I've done that myself for fear of angering and upsetting somebody who I disagree with. And the problem is in that butting out, we choose to stop thinking, stop talking, and stop progressing as an intelligent society. So we at the Centre want to find a better way of talking because we think that's the way to encourage more people to engage and take up a role in society and public life. We're looking to see how we find that balance between a society that is inclusive, welcoming, and non-threatening, but also one where the unpopular, the unfashionable, and the unheard is allowed to be given voice. After all, universities, if they mean anything, should surely include the heterodox as well as the orthodox. and how can they be places of learning otherwise? So this evening, we want to hold a discussion about how we get to that. Give you some guide rails for you as to how we do that, and then discuss how those guide rails might be applied to some of those big questions that I started off talking about this evening. So as I say, we're delighted that we've got Adam to talk about this evening. Now, Adam has been a professor here at the university since 2003. Last year, he published, or rather earlier this year, he published On the Law of Speaking Freely, available in all good bookshops. It is a terrific book, I have to tell you. Adam is a past advisor to the House of Lords, to the UK government, and briefly an MSP. So he has seen politics and public life from all sides. So what we'll do for the next half hour or so, 40 minutes, is we'll run through some of Adam's thinking, we'll look at the arguments for free speech, the limits of free speech, and the question of offensive speech and how to combat it, in the hope that by doing so, we can, as I say, find that better way of talking and listening to each other. And then I'm going to come to you, for you to discuss some of these issues as well, because we're keen to involve you so that it's not just Adam and I waffling away here at the front. Okay, so Adam, let's just go through that very broad question to begin with, perhaps, around the arguments for the idea for free speech, because I think some people would like to hear, why is free speech even important? Why should we care?
Okay, so thank you very much, Eddie, and hello. I wrote this book, which you should buy, because, as it rather pompously says on the back cover, I wanted to rescue free speech from the culture wars. I believe in free speech. I think it's really important. And I hate what's happened to it. All of the examples that Eddie gave in his introductory remarks were examples of the state, typically the police, either stopping somebody from speaking or threatening to arrest somebody from speaking or interfering with somebody's liberty in some way because they have spoken or tweeted or whatever it is. That's not actually the principal threat to free speech that you face. It's certainly not the principal threat to free speech that I face or that Eddie faces. The principal threat to free speech that we face comes from ourselves, from each other. Just yesterday I was talking at length to a student of mine who's commencing work on an essay on an aspect of free speech, and the conversation went on for slightly longer than was timetabled because it was so interesting, and she's such an interesting student. She's not here, so I can't embarrass her. And she was telling me about why she was interested in this, and she's saying, I can't even open up in the library. Well, you shouldn't be speaking in the library anyway, right? I can't even open up in the library and talk to my, because the risk of saying something which is not received wisdom, which is perceived to be far right, and anything which isn't accepted is perceived to be far right. I will get silenced and cancelled and abused as a bigot. So the principal risk to free speech that we face and that you face, that we face on campus, doesn't come from the authorities. And that's something which is very different from the environment that I grew up in the 1980s. When in the 1980s, if lawyers were writing about free speech, they were left-wing civil libertarians worried about the authoritarian overreaction of the Thatcher government. So it was quite fashionable to be in favor of free speech, right? And that doesn't seem to be the issue now. So the reason why I wrote this book, Eddie, is because I was fascinated by how the argument for free speech had changed over the course of my lifetime, from being one that the left would broadly welcome in the form of kind of like civil liberties lawyers challenging the overreaction of the authoritarianism of the Thatcher and in the United States Reagan administrations to the situation that we're in at the moment. But one of the things that's really interesting is that the arguments for free speech have remained the same, despite the fact that the culture in which free speech is challenged has changed so much. So I'm going to give you 3 reasons why I think free speech is important. That's a terrible picture. I was young once. The first is that, look, I do not think that free speech is cost-free. Right? One of the problems with the phrase free speech is the word free. Right? Free speech, there's a price to pay for free speech. Right? People will use words in all kinds of egregious ways. People will express themselves in ways that are designed to deceive you, to defraud you, to lie to you. They will defame you. They will libel or slander you. They will attack your reputation. They will breach your copyright. They will breach your confidences. These are all wrongs that are caused by words. So we call it the right to free speech. But this right, the exercise of this right to free speech can sometimes cause significant wrongs, rather than it being a right. And speech isn't free. We all know that the old playground nursery rhyme that sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt me, is untrue. Right? Being called something which is unpleasant can be really wounding, and words can harm people in ways that take longer to heal than a bruise. So I'm not a free speech advocate because I think speech is always good, or because the right to free speech should be unlimited. I'm a free speech advocate despite the fact that I know that there's a price to pay for free speech. And the reason why I'm a free speech advocate despite knowing that there's a price to pay for free speech is because the alternative is worse. Much, much worse. Imagine that you couldn't walk into a bookshop and choose what book to read or buy. I mean, I know it's a bad example because you don't read books because you're addicted to your phones, like my own children are, right? But let me imagine that I can't walk into a bookshop and choose for myself what to read and equally importantly, what not to read. Imagine that some authority has chosen that for me. Imagine that the press, books are all licensed and we can only read that which is officially sanctioned. Now, this is what most human beings who have lived in the age of print have experienced, right? Free speech is a frighteningly recent and modern innovation. For most of the time when printing has been available as a technology, it has been licensed, it has been limited, it has been restricted. And that's my first argument, right? That any kind of form of state licensing of the police or the government or the church or the university principal telling me that I can read these books but I can't read those books is worse than whatever cost I might have to pay or whatever price I might have to pay for the wrongs of free speech. So that's my first argument. And the first person to articulate that argument was John Milton in 1644. That's the argument of Areopagitica, which is the great tract that John Milton, the poet who wrote Paradise Lost, wrote against Cromwell's. He supported Cromwell in the Civil War. And Cromwell sought to reintroduce state licensing because Cromwell didn't like the fact that there were royalists who were writing against the Commonwealth. And Milton, who was a Commonwealthman, he was not a royalist, wrote this wonderful tract against state licensing. It's still the best essay I've ever read against licensing. That's the first argument. The second argument is this one, the argument from human flourishing, right? We can't grow unless we expose ourselves to ideas that we didn't already have or that we might even disagree with. I learned this the hard way. I was in the pub in about 2012. You can often find me in the pub. I was in the pub in 2012 talking to friends of mine about the fact that we all knew that a Scottish independence referendum was coming. And these friends were on a different side of the argument from the side of the argument that I had the misfortune to be on. And I was talking with them and I thought, I can't defeat their arguments. Their arguments are better than my arguments, and I need to go and do some homework. I need to go and learn, right? And I will never remember that night because I was quite terrified that I might be wrong. And I did some homework, and I realized I wasn't wrong, and their arguments could be defeated. I just hadn't done the work. But it's so boring to live in a world where people are only reinforcing your preconceptions, your prejudices, what you already in a half-baked way think. You might be wrong, right?
And this is the great phrase you use from one of the heroes of your book.
Yeah, Oliver Wendell Holmes. So one of my favorite judges. I don't really like judges. I'm a law professor. I've been a law professor all my life. I went straight from primary school to being a law professor. And it's odd being a law professor and not really liking judges. This is something I can say tonight, but I can't say it on Thursday, because on Thursday we're entertaining a justice of the UK Supreme Court here on campus, which is pretty cool. And she's coming to my class on Friday, which is even cooler. So I'm not going to tell her that I don't like judges very much, but she's not here yet, so I can tell you. I don't like judges very much, but Oliver Wendell Holmes is one of the judges I do really like. And he's a fascinating man. He was on the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, for 30 years, which is far too long. But he was on the US Supreme Court for 30 years. And before he got to the US Supreme Court, he fought in the American Civil War in the 1860s. He was injured 3 times during the Civil War, and each time he went back to fight again. After the war, he became friends with lots of people who'd been on the other side, became friends with people who'd been Confederates. And, you know, he didn't think he was wrong, right? Oliver Wendell Holmes never thought that he was wrong to be on the Union side and not on the Confederacy side in the US Civil War. But he recognized that the only way in which he was going to be able to talk those people round, now that the war was over and he was no longer allowed to kill them, was talking to them. We might be wrong, right? It was his foundational value. Was, you know, one of the cleverest men ever to grace the US Supreme Court, and his mantra, his motto, boiled down to, I might be wrong. And the only way I'm going to find out whether I'm wrong or not is by listening to people who disagree with me, by listening to people who have things to say which are not already my ideas. And that way I might learn. I might change my mind, and I might learn. I can't remember what the last argument was. That's 2 anyway. Well, that's enough.
I was also going to mention John Stuart Mill, who's the other big figure in the book, and there's an amazing phrase he comes up with which is so relevant to our times, where he talks about the dangers of looking at facts only through glasses coloured by our opinions.
That's right. Yeah.
Which again is so kind of relevant, I think, to
we cannot divest ourselves of preconceived. I'm not quoting myself. This is John Stuart Mill. We cannot divest ourselves of preconceived notions. Since we cannot divest ourselves of preconceived notions, there is no known means of eliminating their influence but by frequently using the differently coloured glasses of other people. Beautiful.
I think your third argument, not to just put words in your mouth, was individual fulfillment. Is that right?
It's more or less the same thing.
More or less the same thing.
Anyway, so those are some arguments for free speech. Yeah, okay. And I think the interesting thing is that those arguments for free speech apply whether you're in the context of the 1980s, thinking about being a kind of lefty civil liberties lawyer arguing on behalf typically of the Guardian newspaper against the Thatcher government, or whether you're somebody now who is worrying about being cancelled because they have the wrong view about Gaza, or they have the wrong view about trans rights or something, and they're feeling that they don't have the license somehow to articulate or challenge received wisdom. Yeah. Challenge received wisdom, especially, always mine.
But even an advocate for free speech like you, and I think even advocates for free speech, even in the States at the moment, would accept there have to be limits.
Absolutely.
To free speech. So what are those limits?
Okay, so I think it's useful to think about words and fists as if they are not that divorced from one another. We all have fists. Most of us have fists. And we're all allowed to use them for some purposes and not for others, right? I can use my fists to kind of like indicate my frustration with your shit questions, but I can't use my fists to punch you on the nose.
Yeah.
Right? So what's the difference between using my fists to indicate frustration and using my fists to harm you? Mm-hmm. That's it, isn't it? It's harm, right? Mm-hmm. So I cannot lawfully threaten or abuse you with my fists. And nor should I be able to threaten or abuse you with my fists. So if I can't lawfully threaten or abuse you with my fists, why should I be allowed to threaten or abuse you with my words, whether they're spoken or written or tweeted or whatever it is? So I think that I don't think there should be any right at all to use words in a manner which threatens or abuses other people. And the reason why I think that is partly because there is the analogy with fists, right? And we want to say that freedom of speech is distinguishable from freedom of action, and speech is not action, and behavior and speech are distinguishable from one another, but we also all know that they blur into one another, right? That there is this thing that the Americans call expressive conduct, right? If you are take your Palestine Action example, which is a really good one. If you are holding up a placard silently at a peaceful demonstration indicating your support for Palestine Action, which is a prescribed organization, that's a criminal offense, because it is illegal in this country to indicate support for a prescribed organization. So don't do it for the time being. All right? That's my free, unsolicited legal advice. Don't do that for the time being. But what are you doing? Is it an action or is it speech? Is it speech? Is it your speech that's being criminalized, or is it an action, standing on the street corner, holding a plaque? And the answer is, in that context, there isn't really any distinction between speaking and acting. It's a speech act, right? It's expressive conduct. So I don't see the problem with analogizing from fists to words in the way that I just did. But, and herein lies the really important, the really crucial distinction. There is the world of difference between threatening and abusing, which I don't think we have the right to use words to do, and offending or insulting. And the argument in my book is that when the law challenges or criminalizes or limits our speech because and only because somebody else is offended by what we have said, the law is making a mistake. The answer to offensive speech is not to cancel or silence or censor the speaker. The answer to offensive speech is to speak back and to explain why the speaker is wrong to be using the bigoted or whatever it might be terms that the speaker is using. And that's the line that the book draws, the distinction between threatening and abusive on the one hand and, as it were, merely offensive or insulting on the other.
I think you say there's a world of difference. I think a lot of people, though, find it quite difficult to distinguish. You know, I mean, we can imagine, like the great example that Holmes uses on, well, you can't run into a crowded theatre and scream fire.
Well, and falsely shout fire.
Or falsely shout fire, right.
Yeah.
So there's a good example of something you...
And why can't you do that? Why can't you do that? Because if you do that, then there'll be a stampede and people will get injured. So it will cause harm, right? So the key idea is harm, right?
Yeah.
To threaten somebody or to abuse them is to do them harm.
Yeah.
But to offend them or to insult them is to hurt them, but not to harm them in that sense.
Because I would just put to you, it's not that a world of difference. And actually in the book again, you kind of you make the point it's quite a nuanced position to the judgment is quite a difficult one, isn't it? To kind of work out, you yourself say you take kind of lessons from people who worry about the impact of hate speech, as well as the more kind of libertarian argument, which says it's far better just to allow everybody to offend as much as they like, because you get the counter reaction. There's a great example I think you get of in America, a community, a largely Jewish community, I think, where the Nazi League decide to have a conference in this very Jewish town. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, Skokie, Illinois.
Yeah. And as a result of that, the counter-speech reaction to that was that the local community set up a Holocaust museum, I think, which lives to this day. And there's a great example of how, by permitting offensive speech or an offensive action, there is a counter-reaction that has been arguably more, more influential.
Yeah, so you're Jewish.
But it's not easy.
So you're Jewish and you're living in a Jewish community, and the Nazis. This is a real story. I mean, in the 1970s in Illinois, just outside Chicago, and a lot of Holocaust survivors were living in Skokie, Illinois, and I can't remember what they were called, but the American something League, whatever it was. I mean, they are sort of neo-Nazis, fascists. Wanted to march down the streets of this particular suburb of Chicago, Skokie. And the American Civil Liberties Union intervened in the case, defending the right of the Nazis to march down the street. And this was highly controversial at the time. But the result of it was that the local Jewish community got together and decided, well, we need to educate people about why we think this is wrong. We need to educate people about why it's not okay to celebrate Nazism, why it's not okay to celebrate Nazism anywhere, but certainly not in a community that has a very large number of Jewish residents, including a significant number of Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. And so we will build a Holocaust Memorial Center, which is an education center, which is still there. You can go visit it. It's huge. And that is a wonderful example, it seems to me, of the power of counter-speech. Rather than cancelling the march, and if you'd cancelled it, it would just have happened somewhere else. Rather than cancelling the march, rather than banning the speech is obnoxious in the extreme. It's horrific, right, to see signs of the swastika being waved around the streets of Skokie that you have fled to from Central Europe because your family has been persecuted in the Holocaust. It's horrific. But what a monument to the power of counter-speech rather than censorship that museum is. So it's a quite well-known example on the other side of the Atlantic, less well-known here.
I wonder if you could give us another kind of theoretical example, if you like, of this that border between, on the one hand, saying we shouldn't allow threatening and abusive speech, but we should allow offensive speech. Can you give us an example of something you think, well, that just about falls within bounds?
Well, let me put it in two more ways, which are different. These are different ways of saying the same thing, but some of these words might land with some people, even if you don't like the offensive, threatening versus even if you don't like the threatening, abusive versus offensive, insulting, distinctive. Yeah. So one way of putting it is a clear and present danger, right? So that's a line, again, it's from Holmes. It's from Holmes's judgments in the US Supreme Court. In order for speech to be banned, there must be a clear and present danger that is being posed by that speech. So it can't be some kind of fuzzy risk of future violence. It's got to be a clear risk of violence now, right? And in the law on this side of the Atlantic, we use a very similar test. We don't use those words, but we use a very similar test. In order for an arrest for breach of the peace to be lawful, there must be a reasonable apprehension of imminent violence. Yeah. And that's harm, right? If there's a reasonable apprehension, you're not being unreasonable, you're being reasonable, and you reasonably think that there's about to be violence because of the things that this idiot is saying. Sorry, I'm not pointing at you. Because the things this person is saying, then yeah, you can stop it, right? But anything short of that, then you've got time to construct an argument to speak back. Yeah, right? Got it. Right? Yeah. So the reason why it's okay to ban words which are threatening and abusive is the same as it's okay to ban fists which are being used in a threatening and abusive way, because there isn't time to reason your way out of it.
Duck.
There's going to be, exactly, you can't duck. Yeah. There's going to be trouble, right? Yeah. So it's a public order point. Yeah, right? Yeah, got it.
Okay, so we've gone through some of the theory. We talked a little bit about what are the arguments for free speech. You've given us that distinction between what is and isn't and what should and shouldn't be permitted. Let's just bring this now to the kind of present day and where I began, which was my fear, as I say, that such is the kind of febrile, angry nature of a lot of our political debate at the moment, that we can have all these nice arguments around, this is why we should have counter-speech and not censorship, and this is why we should have more speech and not less speech. But because all people are getting often on their phones and so on and so forth, is just this maelstrom of anger and rage. A lot of people are checking out. A lot of people are just saying, I'm not going to enter into this, it's too risky, I could end up being cancelled or whatever, I don't want to go there. So how do these long-standing arguments that have been developed over centuries, as your book demonstrates, how do those stack up in this kind of new social media age? Doesn't that require more protection in the past against abusive speech? When we have so much speech now and so little listening, if you like, do we not now require more protection against people saying, well, this is all just free speech, using free speech as an argument essentially just to be hateful?
I think we do need more protection, yeah, I think we do. And I make that argument in the book, right? So for me, the core of the issue is identifying what the harm is that the speech can cause, right? And I've said it before this evening, I'll say it again. I do not think we do not have an absolute right to free speech. There are limits to the ways in which we should be allowed and permitted to express ourselves. And if we are using words in such a way that causes demonstrable harm to people, and I'm distinguishing harm from hurt, if we are using words which is in such a way as is causing demonstrable harm to people, we shouldn't be allowed to do that. And the sad reality is that there are greater harms online than there are offline. Online speech has the potential to be more dangerous than offline speech for a variety of reasons. One reason is that a lot of it is anonymous, right? None of us here are anonymous. I mean, we don't know each other's, well, you know my name, but I don't know. But, we can see each other's faces, we can interact with each other in the normal way. We're accountable in this room for what we say and how we say it, accountable to each other. But we all know that there are lots of online trolls who are not accountable to anyone. They're just... So the anonymity of the online world is one of the additional risks. The accessibility. There are all sorts of ways in which speech and access to speech is filtered in the offline world. There used to be a rule, I don't know if it still is a rule, but there used to be a rule that certain sorts of broadcasting couldn't happen before 9 o'clock in the evening, the watershed. I don't know if that still is a rule or not, but it used to be the case. But there's no such restrictions on online. So one of the huge, I mean, I am, like you, Eddie, we're both fathers of teenage children, and the exposure that our children have to all kinds of stuff is, well, we just would rather not know. I mean, the solution to that is to bury one's head in as much sand as you can find and hope for the best. And there are other risks with online speech as well, which don't really have analogues in the offline world. So the point is this: if the harms are greater online, then the protection needs to be greater online.
What do you? I think I heard you smirking a little bit before when I quoted Nigel Farage.
Wincing. I was wincing.
Comments that we are now North Korea when it comes to. I mean, because America seems to have suddenly got it in for us, hasn't it?
Well,
it suddenly seems to decide the UK is this place where free
it's interesting, isn't it? J.D. Vance said a couple of things at the beginning of the year that indicated this. Yeah. So Keir Starmer was in the Oval Office meeting the president, and Vance, the vice president, of course, said in front of the prime minister in the Oval Office that. Speech was at risk, free speech was at risk in the United Kingdom. And then the following month, Vance goes to Munich to the annual he goes to the security conference and gives a speech about European security in which he says that the greatest threat to European security in 2025 is not Putin's Russia or Islamic extremism or the politics of the Middle East or anything else. The greatest threat to European security is the fact that you're losing sight of freedom of speech, said Vance. And then, when Charlie Kirk was murdered, and there were some people who appeared to celebrate that murder, J.D. Vance was absolutely condemnatory of that speech. So he's not a particularly reliable champion of free speech, is he? And, and neither is any politician, frankly. I mean, Vance is an easy case. Farage would also be an easy case. It's very easy to defend speech that you agree with. Right? The test of the extent to which you are a free speech advocate comes when you are having to defend speech you loathe, speech you disagree with. That's what tests your commitment to free speech. And Vance fails that test at the first hurdle.
I want to go back to this, again, just my opening comments, I was making this point around how, because of the sheer amount of speech, and that we may be, and the kind of febrile nature of our debate, that we may be deterring people from even getting involved and speaking out at all. I'd be interested to know what you would say to somebody on campus, perhaps somebody in this room who feels scared to speak out. And it's all very well saying, oh, the answer to speech is to speak back. What if you don't feel equipped to do so? And life is not a debating chamber, is it? And what advice would you give to people who maybe feel as though it's not very nice out there?
It's not very nice out there.
I won't use my speech at all.
No. I mean, the first thing I'd say is I'm one of those people. I chill my speech. There are things that I have not said in the course of the last couple of years that I have, and the reason why I have not said them is because I don't want to have to deal with the flack. And so one of the things I would say is, welcome to my world. I mean, that is part of. I mean, I think I do condition my speech. I mean, I condition my speech partly out of fear, which is not noble, but also out of professional responsibility. I mean, there's all sorts of things I don't say in the classroom. I might have the legal right to say them in the classroom, but I might also get fired if I did. And it might be right that I would get fired if I did. So, I mean, our speech is conditioned by appropriately conditioned in all sorts of ways. But the thing I would say is, the next time they feel that they can't say something, one way into it, which is not so confrontational, is to say to the person that they think is chilling their speech or cancelling their speech or whatever it is how would you seek to persuade somebody who disagrees with you? Because the censors, whether they are the police or the Thatcher government or whatever it might be, or whether they are social censure, peer pressure, are able to exercise those powers of censorship only because they feel confident and they feel powerful. So what if they were trying to persuade somebody, right, that their view was right, and that, what if they stood for election? What if they knocked on a few doors and realized actually outside of the university student bubble, not everybody does agree with their presumptions about sex and gender or Israel and Gaza or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start having to persuade people, you start having to listen to people.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I would say is that the only reason why those people are threatening to cancel or chill your speech is because they've never put themselves in that position. And it's actually a sign of their weakness, not a sign of their strength.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But the fear is real. I mean, the fear of speaking out is a real thing. And, you know, the only way in which collectively or socially we are going to move beyond that is if the people who are threatening to silence us or chill us don't have the power that we think they currently have. And that is going to require some courage.
Yeah. And I guess a question about universities in particular. How do universities manage this?
Well, I think universities manage this by always being prepared to hear the other side, right? You know, universities are places of disputation and contest and argument and all of that. They have to be, otherwise we may as well not be here. I mean, if we can't have that, then there really isn't any point, right? Universities are places where we will disagree with all kinds of texts that we are reading, or all kinds of people that we're studying with, or all kinds of professors who are leading us astray, or whatever it might be. And there are, I think the University of Glasgow plays a magnificent role in Scotland, and in West Central Scotland in particular, in being a civic university, a university that has things like the John Smith Centre, a university that reaches out, a free plug, yeah, a university that reaches out into the city and into the country as a place which is not just for its members, not just for its professors and its students, but for everybody to come and listen to and engage in historical argument, contemporary argument, political argument, economic argument. And, you know, this university has thrived in moments of significant political tension in the course of the time I've been here. As you said, I got here in 2003. It's a very long time. And let me give you an example. In the independence referendum, we packed out the Gilbert Scott Lecture Theatre, which is at the bottom of University Avenue, on 2 occasions in the summer of 2013. The first occasion was Jim Wallace, who was Lord Wallace, the Advocate General in the UK government. And the UK government published a really important paper that talked about what the legal consequences of independence for Scotland would be. What would it mean in terms of the distribution of assets and liabilities and institutions? What would happen to the Bank of England? What would happen to the currency? What would happen to pensions? What would be the legal consequences of independence? And the UK government published a paper setting out its view about what the legal consequences would be. And Jim Wallace was invited by me to campus to talk about that view. And the then principal, current principal's predecessor, Anton Muscatelli, said, absolutely, we'll have Jim Wallace on campus, and the following week we'll have somebody from Yes Scotland putting the alternative view. And we did, and Nicola Sturgeon came to the same lecture theatre and packed it out and gave a lecture, or gave a talk, a speech. So you hear both sides, right? You come to Jim Wallace, whether you're a supporter or an opponent, or undecided, and a lot of people were undecided in July 2013, wherever it was, May, June, July 2013, whenever that took place, and you listen to the arguments. And then you come back the following week and you listen to Nicola Sturgeon, you listen to the arguments, and then you vote accordingly. That's what we're for, right? We can't do that if we only hear one side.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really, really important. Hear the other side. It's a really, really important discipline.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Adam. We're going to give you a little break to